Hello class, this is Emily, your instructor. Today I just wanted to talk about editing and importing artwork. This is going to be particularly helpful to customize puppets, especially for this first assignment, which I call Breaking Chad, in which you'll take an existing puppet and make it your own. This is actually an example of that because this puppet that I created is the exact same puppet as this one. So I took this template puppet and I edited it to create this lovely feline here. So I want to talk about how I went about that. And like I said, this is actually your first project. Just to get used to the hierarchy and the layers and the workflow within this program, I want you to do this first. So what we're going to do is click on our home button. And if we go to our home screen, there's a bunch of tutorials like I mentioned before. These are great, done by Dave Werner. They're all in program, so you can kind of take over puppets and interact with them. We also have all of these default puppets, and I talked about this a little bit in that initial introduction, but we want to download the Chad puppet for this particular assignment and exercise. Now you can have the option of a Photoshop or Illustrator file to edit. It's really up to you. I chose Illustrator, but you can do it either way. And just for an example, if I click on Chad Illustrator, it copies that file, it puts the puppet into a scene, and it allows me to edit it right away. So I want to edit this file, and the Illustrator one here is already the cat file. So why don't we rename that scene actually. If I double click on it, it opens. If I just click on it once and hit return, I could call this Cat Chad. And watch for capitalization there. And I know it doesn't say scene anymore, but we really don't need that because of the icons. Scenes all have these little clapboards, and puppets have these little head and body icons. We're going to be talking about bodies, of course, in an upcoming lesson, but I really wanted to focus on just the head animation and all of the layer hierarchy involved in that. So in order to edit your puppet, like I said, you want to go to the home screen and create a Photoshop or Illustrator version of the Chad puppet. If I go to this one here, this is one I haven't modified yet. Because I've done this 3 times, you can see some varieties, but I can just double click on the one I'm interested in. So this is using the Chad Illustrator 2 puppet. And so I'm just going to right click on this. That's basically the non-cat one. So I'm just going to click on the cat puppet and call that Cat Chad. Just like the scene, but because they're 2 different things, there's no possibility for saving over anything. So I'm going to click on this Chad Illustrator file, this puppet, and right click and say Edit Original or Command E. And that's going to open up Photoshop or Illustrator, depending on what you're using, and it allows you to fully edit your puppet. So here you can see the layer hierarchy for this file, and this is true for most puppets within Character Animator. You always have a main folder with the character's name. And then everything with else is based on subfolders. Now a full puppet would have a head and body folder with everything included within those 2 things. Chad here just has a head so far, and then you've got eyebrows, nose, and then more subfolders. So the face background has things like the hair, the ears, the left eye, right eye, mouth, nose, and eyebrows all have a plus sign next to them. And that means that that is an independent layer. It's going to move based on your camera movements within Character Animator. I pointed this out within Character Animator before. If you go into rig mode, you'll see something very similar with the layer palette. The layer palette's over here, and everything with a crown next to it is independent. So basically that plus sign translates into a little crown within Character Animator. And the things that have that are, like I said, things that move independently. So like the pupils both need to have that plus sign next to them, or that crown, because otherwise they're not going to move. Just like the mouth isn't going to respond unless it has that next to it as well. So we'll be covering this in greater detail, but that's what that means, whether you're looking at it within the rig mode or within Illustrator or Photoshop. So obviously there's no crowns in these programs, but a plus sign does the same thing and will translate within the puppet. So all I need to do to edit the puppet is make a change in this file and save. So if I go to his hair here, And let's give him some bright orange hair because Halloween's coming up, thankfully. That's a nice pumpkin-y color. And if I click OK and then Command S to save, that's going to automatically update in Character Animator. And when we go back to the record screen, it should update the artwork, and there we have it. Now we have our change made, and you can see it incorporates naturally into the puppet. So his eyebrows look a little out of place here, so I don't need to right click and edit original again. I have a dynamic link now with whatever software is open. So if I go back to Illustrator, I can just shift click on these two eyebrows, use my eyedropper tool, sample the hair. Let's maybe turn those strokes off because that's a little intense. And let's make his nose not red. I'm going to actually sample his flesh color, and I'm actually going to keep the stroke this time, otherwise we wouldn't really see his nose, which looks kind of weird. So again, I'm just going to save, and then when I go back to Character Animator, you know you haven't saved when there's an asterisk next to the name. And once I save and go back into Character Animator, it might take a moment, but then those changes become part of the puppet. And Character Animator saves automatically, but I like to just do Command S just in case to keep things safe. And now you can see I have these changes made to the puppet. So how did I go from this to to my cat? I'm glad you asked. Nobody did, but I'm going to show you. This is actually the Chad puppet. I flipped the nose upside down and elongated it. I gave him new pupils. I greatly stretched the head out. I drew some fur. I kept the same mouth shape. The mouth shape is really something that's going to take some time to get used to just because every phoneme and biseme is different. And this is a great way to study those by looking at an existing puppet. I really kept Chad's normal mouth, but just added a little fang here for some extra style. But this is totally based on that Chad puppet, and that's what this first project is all about. I want you to take that template and make it entirely your own. It doesn't have to be a human. You can really change anything you want about it through Illustrator or Photoshop. So either one's going to work. I'll talk about Photoshop in the next lesson, but it's the exact same technique as far as editing original and making the changes to those layers. Let's make some more extreme changes here. So I'm going to go back to Illustrator. And I just want to take a look at some of these layers a little bit more closely. Let's move some stuff out of the way. So I mentioned that everything with a plus sign next to it is independent. So the eyebrows are. The nose has a plus sign here, and I'm not sure why, because it's really not moving at all. So I'm actually just going to double click on the name and remove the plus sign. And then when I save and update this, this won't be that dramatic of a change, but then back in the rig mode, the nose should no longer have a crown next to it. So that's the direct correlation between the two. So back in Illustrator, within the head, we've got our eyebrows, our nose. The layer hierarchy here just matters in terms of regular layer hierarchy. What do you want visibly on top of the other things? The mouth is probably the most complicated part. Before I get to that, I mentioned the eyes. Each one of them has the eyeball. It has the pupil with the plus sign because that's what moves around. And then you might notice that there is a blink layer here that's hidden. So there's actually a lot of layers within this that aren't visible. If we twirl down the mouth, only the neutral mouth is visible. There's over a dozen other faces and mouths in here. There's over a dozen different mouths in here. So if we take a look at those, the neutral one is just the default and how it's going to look when nothing else is being changed. This is set by your camera in addition to smile and surprise. So those are the only three that respond visually to your face. All these other ones are phonemes. They're actually going to be different mouth sounds that are done automatically, which is one of the most amazing parts of this software. Lip syncing can take a lot of time to process, and this does it instantly, which we'll be talking about performance techniques next week as well. So if we just look at these different mouths, I've got neutral. I mentioned the smile is triggered by the camera, as is surprise. And then we have the D that has closed teeth, E, F with a kind of a bit lip, L, L always has the tongue at the top of the mouth. M basically is just the neutral mouth. O is just basically the surprised mouth, but maybe a little bit bigger. R is like the O, but smaller. S is like the E. Is kind of like the L, but with the tongue not up. Woo is just a black circle. You don't really need to have teeth or tongue. And those are your different phonemes that you have to come up with. So notice that they're not all visible here, but that doesn't matter. When we go into Character Animator, they're going to swap out in the record mode based on what I do or what I say. So if I smile, it should do it too. If I look surprised, it should do it too. And then of course it's the listening to what I'm saying and basically doing live lip sync. I'm not recording right now, but this is just a way of kind of testing the performance first. If it's not responding to you, make sure that in this camera and microphone panel here that you have both the camera and the audio turned on. If I turn the camera off, you can see that it's not moving at all anymore, but it's still responding to the lip sync. And likewise, if I turn the camera on but the microphone off, it'll still follow my head movements and do those visual faces like smile, neutral, and surprised, but it's not doing the lip sync. So you want to make sure those are both on. And then if it's not tracking your face very well, you want to click Set Rest Pose. If you put your face right in the middle of the camera view here, I already have it on, but that's what adds all these dots, which I believe I referred to these as zombie acne in a previous lesson, which is not professional, but you know, it's very descriptive. And it's tracking my pupils, my eyebrows, my nose, and my mouth, and the whole face. So when we get deeper into the program, we can actually create assets and puppets that have head turns and profiles. This just has a front-facing face, which sounds weird, but true. And so I just want to continue editing this puppet to make it my own. So I mentioned with the cat, I really used a lot of the same elements and changed them, but you can swap out things entirely. I do recommend using the same mouth just because the mouth shapes can be really difficult to understand. We're going to be talking about them throughout the semester. And when you make a custom puppet, I'll have you make a model sheet that will have every phoneme figured out as far as what it's going to look like. And from there, we're going to create them in Photoshop and Illustrator and apply them to our puppet using a very similar layer hierarchy to what we see here. There are blank templates, which I'll be putting online shortly, so you can always download those and play with them as well. But I really recommend working with an existing puppet just so you can see kind of the nuts and bolts of it and how it's going to work. In the rig mode, we can see all the layers that are part of the puppet in the Photoshop or Illustrator file. However, if they're not named properly, which is one of the reasons I like to use a template, we can actually assign them within this rig screen. So for example, if the eyebrow wasn't named right eyebrow, quick note, this is an important one, notice that this says right, but it seems like it's left to us. Everything is flipped left and right. You've got to think about the puppet's point of view looking out. So this is actually the right eyebrow and this is the left, etc. for the pupils, eyes, blink, etc. So you can see here on this little stick figure over here that the right eyebrow is assigned. So if it didn't have a right name, the correct name, if it didn't have the correct name, I'd be able to assign it with this right here. Same thing with the overall face shape. If I click on just the face here, or the head rather, so you can assign things this way, but it's better just to have things named properly. And then you can see that there's all the different mouth shapes here that we can assign one by one, and then the body rig, which we'll get into later on. I mentioned head turns, and those are assignable right here. And then all kind of properties and behaviors we can add to automate some of these things, which is an upcoming lecture. So I'm going to go back to record. And I'm really keeping it. So back in Record, I just want to test a few more things here and make some more changes. So I'm going to go back into Illustrator and let's give this guy some craze. Let's give him a little hat. I think he could use a hat. So I'm just going to use I'm going to make sure I'm in the face background layer. And I'm just going to draw my little square here. Let's reverse that and remove the stroke. I'm going to rename this hat because I'm very creative. And let's tilt this a little bit. I'm going to duplicate it by dragging it and just move this over and down. You can see it made 2 layers, but I'm going to use merge layers to combine those. So with them selected, I can go to my align panel and center align them with each other. Within that panel where align and transform are, I can go to Pathfinder and merge my shapes. And now I have a delightful little hat. That's totally the wrong perspective, but we can fix that using our various tools. In fact, I'm just going to curve it just a little bit. And then using my pen tool, I'm going to draw a delightful little band on it. But I want to make sure I'm still in this face background layer. If I'm not, it's just going to put it wherever. So I want to make sure I'm still in face background. I'm going to click on path, but it's going to make its own one anyways. And I'm just going to So we have the little hat. I'm going to save that and go back into Character Animator. And now look at how delightful he is and ready for fall. Kind of looks like a couch without any details or a chair, but hey, I'm just playing around here. Playing really is one of the best ways to learn, and that's what the first few projects within Character Animator are all about. So I encourage you to experiment. If you haven't played with the software yet, this is a great time to start because I want you to start working with an existing puppet and editing it to make it your own. You don't need to worry about a scene or anything like that. I'm going to talk about recording the lip sync within the next class. If you want to kind of practice with that, I fully encourage you to. But then basically I just want you to remake the Chad puppet into something of your own, customizing all of the artwork and the shapes. You can keep things like the mouth. You don't even need to modify that part if you don't want to. There'll be plenty of time for that. Really the point here is to just get familiar with the workflow between these files and Photoshop and Illustrator and how you can edit the files to make them your very own.